most common source of slaves in the Roman world was war. So wherever the Roman army went, in its wake would be literally a train of slave traders. Under Roman law, technically, when a slave runs away, the crime that he's committing is theft, because he's stolen himself from his master.
So I live in one of the most expensive cities that you can think of, but thankfully, the size of my bedroom, pretty good. But when you think about the size of bedrooms back in Roman times, and particularly slave bedrooms over in Pompeii, any room today, even if you work on a cruise ship, looks pretty roomy. Recently, a tiny cramped room with 2 beds but only 1 mattress was discovered in a wealthy suburb, about 2,000 feet north of the walls of the ancient Roman city. So interestingly enough, archaeologists say that they found no evidence of grates, locks, or chains. The room also contained 2 small cabinets and several urns and ceramic containers. They found the remains of a couple of mice and a rat, but really this just kind of establishes how small the bedrooms used to be for slaves back in the day, and also the conditions that they lived in, the poor hygiene, and so much that we could talk about. The first excavations at the Civita Juliana Villa were carried out between 1907 and 1908. Excavations on the site of the villa started up again in 2017 to deter robbers, and several relics have been found, by the way. We're talking ceremonial chariot, a stable, which had the remains of 3 harnessed horses, but part of one of the beds in the newly discovered room was destroyed by a tunnel that was used by robbers to access another part of the villa, at least according to the experts. And officials say materials such as furniture and fabric had decomposed over the years, obviously after being covered by rock fragments and ash, kind of leaving a void. But when the area was filled with plaster, archaeologists were able to create casts to discover the original shape and contours of the long gone material. So long story short, they found a lot of cool stuff, but at the end of the day, the room was very small. Roman gladiators were really exploited, and when you're objectified to the point that they were, that is punishment and a form of servitude. This kind of relates to bizarre beauty trends, folks, and one of them was the use of gladiator sweat as facials. These were believed to improve complexion, maintain youthfulness, because the sweat of successful gladiators was a potent aphrodisiac. Yep, folks, the more successful a gladiator was in the arena, the more potent their bodily fluids were believed to be. So people would collect the sweat from their bodies using a tool called a stridule, and this was used for scraping off dirt, sweat, and oil. It would occasionally be mixed with olive oil to give it a more desirable consistency, and it was sold as a facial cream to the women of Rome. The facial of gladiator sweat was just one of many ways that folks used bodily fluids from gladiators. The redness was another popular commodity. Once again, an aphrodisiac. Some historians even report that the redness of the wounded or passed away gladiators would be mixed with fun fluids and consumed by many. Once again, all relevant because it's just like, hey, gladiators are people too, not just something to be taken things from. So if you didn't know, there were 2 main types of slaves back in the day, public and private. Public slaves were called servi publici and were owned by the Roman government. They might work on building projects for a government official or in the emperor's mine, whereas private slaves, or servi privati, were owned by an individual and worked jobs like household servants, laborers on farms, craftsmen, and they were used for a number of jobs. They could be cleaners, cooks, tutors. If you worked in agriculture, you kind of had a tough time. You would face hard labor, you would have next to no basic life comfort, and you were given those poor living quarters that I talked about before, and you'd be chained at night so you wouldn't run away, and then given minimal food and clothing. Life was easier in towns where slaves worked on construction and repair work, often in the public eye, allowing a greater chance of freedom. With the type of work, they also got very physically fit, which meant they could be sold as a gladiator, and a chance for glory, but then also exploited like we talked about before. So does everyone remember that moment in the Hunger Games when Peeta and Katniss were disgusted after finding out all the rich people would, upchuck at a party just to eat more? Turns out that's kind of a historical fact. Romans took excess to new levels. According to historians, they would eat until they couldn't anymore at banquets, and then everything had to go so they could keep eating. Some people used the bowls that they kept around the table, but other folks were like, oh, no need to be so formal. In some homes, people would just, on the floor, and then just go right back to eating. And slaves are the people you need to feel sorry for in this context. Look, their jobs were terrible. In the words of Seneca, when we recline at a banquet, one slave wipes up the spittle, another situated beneath collects the leavings of the folks under the influence. Just the level of entitlement and disregard for others has personally left me with new levels of hatred and disgust for the elites. I hope this isn't a practice anymore, but you never know. So the vast majority of, Roman women were dark-haired. Blonde hair was associated with barbarians, and body selling in ancient Roman society was 100% legal. There were no social repercussions for men who used those services. But folks who worked in that field, especially lower-class ones, tended to be looked down upon. And to make sure that no good and honest Roman woman was mistaken for such a lady, a law was brought in that stated that women in this field, many of whom were slaves and had no such choice anyways, had to dye their hair blonde. The thinking was this way they would appear more like barbarians rather than regal Roman ladies. And the law worked for like a hot minute. Unfortunately for the lawmakers, noble Roman women soon started to envy the really attractive blonde look. They began either dyeing their hair themselves or demanding that the poor slaves get rid of their hair so that blonde wigs could be made. Which, once again, as history repeats itself, we've seen this over and over again, but it's neat to know where it originated. Rome wasn't built in a day, but it was built on the backs and with the hands of a magnitude of slaves. One of these city's foundational myths is the story of the capture of the Sabine women, who were taken from their community and forced to become reproductive machines for the creation and continuance of the Roman population. Whether bought in markets, seized from nearby communities, or captured as a result of foreign wars, servi were estimated to have made up anywhere from 1/3 to 3/5 of Italy's entire population. That means there were up to 4 million slaves in Italy alone, and that doesn't even count the rest of the empire. Most slaves were people captured in times of war, so as the Roman Empire expanded, they often captured slaves from new lands they conquered. Other folks were bought from slave traders and pirates who captured people from foreign lands and brought them to Rome. Offspring of slave mothers were automatically condemned, with some being born in the city specifically for the purpose of going into the family business. Roman fathers could sell or rent out their sons into slavery, but it was only temporary. A father and prospective buyer would come to an agreement as to the price and duration of the son's servitude. When the time was up, the buyer was expected to bring the son back in roughly the same condition he had received him in. It's really a warped blockbuster situation. But like most things in Roman society, the father could only do this in moderation. He could sell the same son twice and everything was fine. But if you sell your son a third time, you're an unfit father. 3 strikes, you're out. Any son who was sold by his father 3 times was legally emancipated, but only after he'd finished his 3rd stint. And the 3 sales rule applied to each spawn. So if a father wanted to keep making money from his descendants, all he had to do was keep making more of them. So yes, slaves were sometimes set free by their owner, which was referred to as manumission. Roman owners freed their slaves in considerable numbers. Some freed them outright, others allowed them to buy their own freedom, earning the title of being called freedmen or freedwomen. Formal manumission was performed by a very big official, and that would give you full Roman citizenship. And also, if you decide to extend the family line, they have full rights of citizenship. But technically, you're still kind of not fully a Roman citizen. You can't hold public office, and any property or wealth you accumulated goes back to your owner when you leave this mortal plane. And once again, slaves' lives were cruel, with their level of cruelty being much dependent on whom owned them. Skilled individuals who helped their masters with business matters became trusted. They were treated well with the hopes of freedom, but other folks were punished and chained in their position. Some folks tried to speak out, but it wasn't really gonna help anything, sadly. And that's all for today, folks. I've been Alexa, your resident ookie spooky girly. See you next time.